The Porcine Horror, Pig-Ocalypse. 2. Return to Black Cat Ridge. Let's get straight into that. Sheriff Bates surveyed the porcine carcasses within range of his flashlight beam. Fine work, teams. Looks like we're taking care of the problem. Maybe these got into some more meth or other drugs, or maybe it's the usual kind of issues in this area. Nasty people doing nasty things. No one else hurt though, so we've done our due. Round up everyone and we'll debrief and wrap up the operation. Nothing else to do tonight. I'll be buying lunch tomorrow. And none of them heard the near-silent battle that raged on the next hill, with the sound suppressors and quiet warriors. Fled for his life towards the river. He was disorientated and could hear the creatures that pursued him through the darkness. His head hurt more than anything he'd ever experienced, and the wound to his lump caused him to lose concentration. He set his injured leg on the ground out of habit, and it gave way. He skidded to the water's edge and lay there in agony. He had to breathe for a moment before he tackled the swim. The hounds drew close, and he felt sharp fangs pierce his haunches from either side. He used his rear legs to spring forward into the deep current where the two-legged prey creatures had dredged the channel and where he'd crossed about a month previously. He's out in the channel. Thought I'd let you decide whether to kill or capture. McCall coolly briefed Blue Jay and the rest of the team as they gathered on the bank and watched the bulk of a monster hog swim towards the middle of the channel. All eyes remained on the creature, but ears were cocked to hear Blue Jay's decision. Blue Jay knew that the mission was to capture the Cryptid if possible, but no lives were to be put on the line. He wanted the thing dead, but knew that whatever experiments DMT Solutions performed on it would likely cause it more distress than a quick death. The decision was removed from his control as a new monster rose its head and its twist of its insanely large body. The gator took its meal to the bottom of the river. Splashes and swells accompanied the dragon-sized gator, but were soon replaced with the normal swells and rivulets of the current as the water worked its way to the Gulf of Mexico. One month earlier. It was full on dark, and they were out of sight from the bridge of the major highway that crossed the downriver, yet just above the area where the dredging machinery was. The channel was nearly deep in the area, but the current was slow, and they were large and strong beings. The river smelled funny too. Something a little nasty and unusual. Similar to another scent, but modified. She did not raise her level of concern, but took up the rear where her sounder set out to cross the muddy waters. Her brother led the way and quickly found his footing as he reached the shallows on the other side. Mother approached next. She appeared to race ahead to avoid a large log that floated downriver, faster than the current. An enormous set of jaws rose, opened, and clamped down on their mother. As large as she was, the creature that seized her, in its rows of pegged teeth, cleaved her nearly in twain with a twist and roll. It swiftly turned and chomped on her sister, head and shoulders, and crushed the poor thing's skull before she could even squeal in fear. Turned away and headed back towards the only home she'd ever known. Her other sister, had also turned and now swam desperately to catch her, and she had time to squeal, loudly and in ultimate agony, and the jaws closed on her hindquarters and blood spilled into the waters around her. And she met eyes with pleading eyes of her own before she sank beneath the swells of current. Present day. Welcome back to the world, Fox. Blue Jay smiled down at his mentor. Figures you decide to get hurt near a city with world-class medical facilities. You're such a good planner. And Silvio blinked at the fluorescent lighting and nodded to Blue Jay. He turned to face Bjorn, who loomed in the corner of the room. We have to avoid this city, my friend. Last time it almost killed you. Now it's my turn." He winced at the pain as he turned to face back towards Blue Jay. "When I first awakened, the doctor said that nothing vital was destroyed. It's just a small tear in the kidney and the muscles on the lower left side of my torso. They were shredded and I'd lost a great deal of blood. So, no major harm. Perhaps when I transfer to a DMTS facility, I will begin to look like you, my fearless team leader. Now, I know how it felt for you to be left out of the exciting parts of the Aslan mission. I think you will be done with this one before I make it back to the duty roster." Bjorn gave a low growl. Maybe, but the mission has adjusted. We now have to try to capture that monster gator. We'll need a boat, several maybe. We still have a piggy on the loose as well." And Silvio raised his eyebrows questioningly at Blue Jay and added, "Last hours we had the satellite. It recorded a second mammoth hog on the other side of the river. It was out in the swamp, but too near to some apartments and a shopping mall for us to let it be. We are covered up with monsters." He shook his head in wonderment and frustration. "We were so focused on Hog A that we never considered there might be a Hog B on the other side of the river." Blue Jay began the round table meeting. "None of us could have anticipated the big old croco gator thing, either. It's likely had some sort of den, but that's a lot of lizard to hide." McCall chuckled his chin. "The lads and I can handle the porker, but none of us are terribly useful in the water. Plus, it makes them stink." The hounds simply gaped and wagged their bodies. I don't fancy getting gobbled by a gator, and happy grins aside, neither would they. TJ shook his head. "We don't get many gators where we live, at least not big enough to consider. They exist, they're just elusive, hard to spot." Will and Cassie nodded along in agreement. Bjorn rumbled, "So do we take on Hog B, and then the Dragon Gator, or the Gator, and then the Hog? Or split the team and try them both at the same time?" McCall looked over the members of his fire team. He and the hounds would find and rouse the big hog and drive it towards them, much as the original team had done with the first sounder. They had hopes of taking care of this lone monster quickly. Blue Jay and Bjorn were busy settling up matters with the Dragon Gator. They had settled on the cognomen Bjorn had used for the oversized crocodilian. "Maximum loads, expert marksman, and you know where to hit the beastie. Well enough. We have a nice protected space for you. I think we are ready. Main thing is, be careful with the hounds and me. They'll be close to the flanks and I'll be behind. If you hit one of my boys," he pursed his lips, "let's just say the mission won't end well for you. Now, it's getting late and I don't fancy traipsing through this place in the dark, even with a swanky eyewear. But that's when our piggy likes to play. Stay alert and be safe, not sorry." "See here, the tree covers most of it, but right where we stood on the bank, the drag marks of a large, long tail and at least one clear footprint." Bjorn pointed at the high-resolution image on Blue Jay's laptop. "I see. We should confirm in person, though. I hate to be separated from the rest of the team. Maybe we should have ganged up on the first hog, and then tackled this." Blue Jay assumed a doubtful or introverted look as he second-guessed the plan. "There are plenty of folks to handle that part, and we needed to scout this situation. I would like to be with them as well, but we each need backup members, and these two were the best suited to this part of the mission. I've seen them in action. The Cryptid cat crew is deadly to purpose. If they can take out giant freaky cats and Wendigo tribal warriors, they can take out Big Ham on the hoof." Bjorn grinned a little. He had true confidence in the young trio of hunters, and he knew that McCall and the hounds would provide a safety net in case the kids grew overconfident. Later in the day, they slunk through the slough between Crazy Coon Hill and Black Cat Ridge. It was messy and difficult, and a brief rain shower made it more unpleasant as the humidity became choking and the ludicrously large mosquitoes set about dining on them in earnest. Bjorn led the way, expertly wielding an oversized machete when the tangled vegetation became too thick to let them pass. He came to a halt as they neared the river, his head raised and nose turning to seek the wind.
"You smell that? I've been following it for a while."
Bluejay stopped and strained to sniff the air and detect what his friend had smelled. "Ugh, nasty. Something big and stinky has been through here very recently. Guess we had other things on our mind last night, but..." His comments were interrupted by a gargantuan
hiss
from up ahead and the shaking of branches high and to their front. He felt himself propelled towards the Black Cat Ridge side of the gully as Bjorn grabbed his arm and pulled him along.
"Climb!"
was all the big man said as he let go of Bluejay and rushed forward up the incline. And Bluejay clutched at his own machete and pumped his legs to move uphill behind Bjorn as the latter crashed through the brush and aimed for the boles of larger trees. He noticed a wild look in the large young man's eyes, a fierce rage and a struggle for control. Brain had cautioned him about what to expect if Bjorn slipped into a berserker episode, and this is as close as he'd ever seen the man to turning. Video did not do him any justice.
"She's heading your way,"
McCall informed the rest of the team over their communicators.
"We haven't made our move, but she senses something is out of order. We're upwind, but maybe there's more to that big nut on her noggin than we realized. Pigs are canny creatures anyway. Just have to hope she's upset about being left alone."
And Cassie looked at Will. "How does he know that it's a she?" Will shrugged and passed a look to TJ, who thought for a moment. "You may not have noticed, sis, but that one we chased out of our camp had a really big, well, dangly parts, male parts. I guess this one does not." And Will snorted. "I thought maybe she was wearing a skirt or high heels."
"You should be able to hear us in real time soon. We started our pursuit,"
McCall informed them. Indeed, they could hear the faint baying of the wolfhounds as they drove the great sow towards their position. It was only a matter of time before she came into view. When she did, it was nearly a surprise. She bore down a pathway she and her sounder had tunneled through the vegetation. So little of her showed until she burst forth into a small clearing. Cassie aimed for the non-lethal parts and drove the beast towards another path. Will and TJ each fired darts. In their headlong fight, and with the drugs infusing her bloodstream, the sow did not pause to check and soon found herself in the trap. It was strong, and she gave all she could to break free, but eventually she grew tired. Her body was weak from the small wounds in her flank, and she was already stressed from her run. The tranquilizers took full effect, and the two-legged monsters had her at their mercy. From behind, vegetation crunched over a ton of reptilian flesh lurched forward to close jaws on prey. The two men made their way around trees large enough to at least slow the predator, and as they climbed, they trekked uphill to discourage the creature that they hoped preferred to stay near the water. The crashing and thrashing behind them slowed, stopped, and faded into the night. Bjorn stopped beside a large tree that rose just over halfway up Black Cat Ridge. His chest heaved, not with the effort of the climb, but with the strain of holding back the bear. Bluejay stopped beside him, quite pleased that he'd been able to use his bionic leg to keep up with his longer-legged companion. As the last sounds of the monster alligator faded, so too did a madness in Bjorn's eyes and demeanor.
"That was too close,"
he rumbled. And Bluejay simply nodded, and after a moment he collected his thoughts. "I wonder how the others are doing." "I sprayed on some bleed stop. I don't think the wee rounds will cause her too much damage, but just in case." McCall completed the debriefing. "Now, we get machinery down here and lug the bitch onto transport to get rid of her, so we can collect our other monster and be on our way home." Bluejay and Bjorn looked hard at the man and his matter-of-fact assessment of the task ahead. "We saw that thing, McCall. It was a good 30 feet long. Nothing like it around today. in this eon, Bluejay posited. I just wonder what it's eaten and whether it's taken any humans. If the boarhog hadn't attacked us, I might think that he and the sow were innocent bystanders, and the dragon gator was the real culprit in the local disappearances. This one could take a while, and we still need to get some additional expertise and equipment. You know, management will want the thing alive. And Will cleared his throat. All due respect, but we were hired on for a hog hunt. Nobody said anything about dragon gators. That's a whole new ballgame. TJ and Cassie froze beside him. They knew that he wasn't scared, and he was likely just homesick. Still, it wasn't like Will to back away from a challenge. Bluejay eyed the trio. You are right, of course. If you want to go home, it's easily arranged. You did a great job with Mr. and Miss Piggy. But this dragon, something new to all of us. Too many variables and unknowns. However, I think it's only fair to tell you how the local animals became mutated. When the Harvey floods hit, they were unprecedented. One of our facilities upriver was flooded. It was one of those that did experiments on and with cryptids. Those big black cats that plagued your property, no one notices them until their last year or two of life. For some reason, they get a growth spurt late in life. They're unlike anything else on the planet, and the specimens are at that lab. Something from that lab may be developed from the cats, maybe another type of genetic experiment, likely mixed with something on Black Cat Ridge. Well, the area around it, and created the monsters. So, you are working with the company that was the source of the mutations, and that led to our fathers being slaughtered and eaten? TJ completed the sentence passionately. You should have told us before we... It was Bluejay's turn to interrupt. Before your great uncle, the one who worked for the company, convinced you to go along with the program? Oh, it was fine then. Now it's not. Besides, none of us here knew how much he'd told you. We truly do avoid personal questions as part of our company culture. Now you know, so make a decision. Help us clean up the mess or sign silence contracts and go home. We'd love to have you. You all show great promise, but sometimes the world presents cruel, hard decisions to us. He inadvertently glanced at his left arm as he said the last. And the trio looked at one another, and TJ and Cassie stared the question at their friend. At last Will nodded. Yeah, our dads would have helped anyway. Uncle Jim once shared something with us. Friends are critical, not only for social needs but to uplift one another above the muck and grime of mere survival into the heights to which a soul may soar. We don't know gatorology. How do we get started? Bish doesn't look too happy with us, TJ muttered as he knocked on the cage in which the gigantic sow lay stretched. There was little room for her to move, to gain momentum. She was also chained to the floor. They had taken no chances. Her reddish, hate-filled eyes stared at the cryptid cat crew as they circled the enclosure and studied a monster they'd captured. Cassie reached in and poked at the injuries she had caused. Those little rounds barely nicked her. Got through the hide and into the flesh, but those ribs and muscles stopped them short of any real damage. The sow flinched when the teen touched the wounds and let out a low grunting growl, with just a hint of a squeal at the end, as though she tried to speak in a language known only to her. Will performed the ritual of touching the monster, and now looks longingly back across the river towards the higher parts of Black Cat Ridge. That's where they died, somewhere up there on that ridge. After the transport team hauled away their prize pig, the trio made their way over the river and onto the highest point of the ridge and looked out through the trees towards the glinting river. Unbeknownst to them, they were not far from the fallen tree where their fathers had met their end under the hooves and teeth of the original sounder and mammoth hogs. They decided to make their way a little further along the ridge as it slowly rose towards a higher and drier land. Eventually, it flattened, and they found the remnants of a small building and the last vestiges of an old gravel and mud road that led away to the east. TJ barked out a laugh as he kicked away some pine straw and lifted a rotted piece of board. Uncle Jim's hangout? Remember, Cassie, when he told us about that talking cat? Said he'd been drinking at Maiden's Ice House? He triumphantly lifted the remains of a faded and rotting sign. The sign broke when he set it against a tree, too rotted by the local climate to be a souvenir. However, they rooted around until they each held a bottle and some rusted nails and other small artifacts, including a horseshoe that had likely hung over the doorway. Satisfied, they made their way back to base camp, each absorbed in his or her thoughts. "I really miss him," TJ quietly proclaimed. The others just trekked silently along with him, each revisiting memories of their fathers and their first mentor. Team, here are our two contractors, Boudreaux and Tribidoux. They are from Louisiana and have extensive gator and crocodilian experience. And the team members greeted each of the men and all settled down for the first briefing. The Dragon Gator gave us a priority on gear. The new drones are great, beats waiting on satellite images, no matter how good. We've managed to locate the creature's den and a few food lockers and a sun in place, at least as indicated by the drag marks, and him chasing us uphill, even though that was after dark. And by the way, the transport team was able to move Silvio to the DMTS facility for real medical treatment. Miss Piggy is on her way to the R&D department, and good riddance. So, we all clear? Everyone knows his or her role? The contractors made the rounds and greeted everyone, and they gave their names as Bood and Tibby. And they passed a small test from Brian and Skyland, and so everyone relaxed a little. The pair escorted the team down the river's edge. "This the boat," Tibby proclaimed. "Had to put it up river, but it's how we got here so fast. Much bigger than the little motorboats we usually use." And he and Bood showed the crew how to operate the boat, so that in the emergency, anyone could take the helm. Then they showed them the equipment they would use to try and capture the Dragon Gator. "Seriously?" Will exclaimed. "You're going to try to lasso that thing, haul it into the shore, and ride it like a bull?" And Bood and Tibby looked at each other and shrugged. And Bood shrugged again. "That's the way it's done. At least the way we do it. Hunters will just shoot it." At the dubious looks from the rest of the team, Tibby added, "Look, gators are one big old bunch of muscle, covered up in an armor with claws and teeth. On land or shallow water, they can use their legs to push. In the deeper water, like this river, they have to push again water, not as strong in some ways." He was rewarded with brightening features from the neophyte gator hunters. "This thing probably hunts in the swamp most days," Bood opined. "Just goes into the river channel to get to other places, like a road." Their boat was 25 feet long, and with an inboard motor. Bood stood at the helm and guided them along the banks of the muddy San Jacinto. And Tibby kept a sharp eye on the landward side, especially at the estuaries of the creeks and the small waterways that led into the river channels. The rest of the crew watched, though with less expertise. McCall and the hounds were on standby at Crazy Coon Hill, ready to deploy should the need arise. McCall had offered to track along the banks, but Bood and Tibby had recommended against it. They'd likely find the creature and the dogs would only get wet in the face of unneeded threat and a tactical disadvantage. Even their teeth would not penetrate alligator hide. How he maintained radio contact and monitored the drones that checked each side of the river. They'd likely find the creature, and the dogs would only get wet and a face of unneeded threat and a tactical disadvantage. Even their teeth would not penetrate alligator hide. He now maintained radio contact and monitored the drones that checked each side of the river in the clear spaces. "Man, these goggles are something else," Tibby exclaimed. "Might as well be full-on daylight. My eyes are getting old, but with these things, it's like when I was a young'un." After a few hours working the south bank, the one with the large creek that was, according to their experts, gator happy lane for a big sucker like this one, they turned their attention back towards the north bank and headed back east towards Black Cat Ridge, a place where the land rose just enough to notice. As they approached the gully that ran between Crazy Coon Hill and Black Cat Ridge, Tibby rose excitedly. "There!" He pointed at what most people would look like a large log floating in the current, its bulk just below the surface. You can see them eyes. Man, oh man, they are far apart on the head. This one is big and got a wide mouth to boot. Bood maneuvered the craft to approach the head of the creature from behind. They hoped to avoid it snapping at the craft, since the monster was large enough to damage or even capsize it. Tibby urged the rest of the team to stand up and get behind him. He held out a loop on the catch pole. Not sure I want to catch this one, he muttered mostly to himself. When I get him, he's gonna roll and dive. When he stops, everybody grabs the pole and pulls him in close to the boat. Blue Jay, you gotta put that giant rubber band on and tape up the snoot. Gotta be careful. But once the mouth is closed, the teeth ain't no problem. Just the size and the muscles. Tibby opened the loop on the catch pole as far as it would go, and when they got him close enough to the snoot, he slid it into the water. The dragon gator hadn't moved, it simply eyed them warily, deciding just what the large object that had sidled up to them was. It could smell the food located just above the surface of the water, but it wasn't particularly hungry at the moment, only curious. The noose slithered over the snout and closed around its jaws, and the fight began in earnest. He rolled away from the boat and attempted to break free of the grip on his mightiest weapon. He whipped his tail and scrabbled with his claws in a vain attempt to gain purchase or ward off his attackers. The boat shifted and tilted alarmingly, and the team had to shift their weight in counter to the force exerted by the dragon gator. And then it suddenly went limp. Tibby nudged Bjorn and they began to pull the beast towards the boat. Once the top of its head rested against the side of the boat, it seemed to calm for a moment. They paused to take a breath. Bood patted Blue Jay on the shoulder. Do it, buddy! Blue Jay made his way to where the enormous head rested against the hull of the boat. The opening muscles for the jaw were very weak compared to the closing bite force muscles. He reached out with his biotech arm and seized the snout in a hug. He could still only get partially around the monstrous orifice. He reached out with his right hand to slip on the rubbery band material and then began applying the tape. The gargantuan head slung forward, and Blue Jay was pulled from the boat and flung into the churning water near the bank of the river. His grip had not broken, but had slid free from the wet, slick hide. Tibby hid the water just behind the great beast's head, and Bjorn managed to grasp the rail and keep himself and his young assistants from leaving the boat. They almost flipped the craft with a sudden shift in weight distribution. Bood was quick and accelerated the boat as he turned away from the dragon gator. He had saved the craft but created distance for Tibby, so that now he treaded water equidistant between the jaws of death and the relative safety of the watercraft. Blue Jay had found himself in relatively shallow water and now strove to reach the shore as the monster behind him hissed and raged in confusion and anger, trying to decide which attacker to destroy. And Blue Jay knew better than to pause once he reached land. He followed the same pattern he and Bjorn had used 2 days earlier and ran up the incline towards Black Cat Ridge, and Tibby struck out for the boat. Instead of the small prey, it swam past the struggling Tibby and straight after the large object, attacking the boat. It rammed its head against the side and attempted to clamp its jaws on the smooth surface. And while it could not immediately gain purchase, its bulk moved the craft further out into the river. Boo tried turning the bow and towards the dragon gator to spin away from it. The maneuver worked as they were soon headed for the shallows near the bank. Yet the big reptile was able to slide under the craft and push against the silt. It raised its back and the boat tipped alarmingly out of the water. It swung around its head and snapped its tooth-filled jaws closed on the rail. The weight dragged the craft down on that side, and when it reached the tipping point, the entire crew found themselves in the water, in the rank swirls of bottom mud stirred by their foe. Bood yelled, "Swim for the bank, you!" He need not bothered, as each head bobbed up and orientated in that direction. The body soon followed with swift strokes and scrambling hands and knees as they reached the shallows. TJ, while athletic, was unable to find purchase on the slick mud of the bank as the current pushed him downstream and Black Cat Ridge created an even steeper climb. A dark appendage reached out and grasped his collar, and he found himself pulled ashore by Blue Jay's biotech arm. Their team leader fished out each member of the team who was unable to climb on his or her own. Bjorn stood waist deep and carried Bood, A swirl in the current behind him caused him to toss the groaning man towards the others already on the bank. He then dove back upstream, against the direction of the angry dragon gator. As he plunged beneath the surface, the front leg of the creature stepped on him and drove him deep into the sludge as it propelled itself forward. He was unable to rise before the rear leg once more pressed him downwards. The weight of the monster was reduced by its buoyancy, but the air in his lungs was pressed from him and his ribs creaked alarmingly. He inhaled lungs full of filthy river water as the base of the tower slivered over him, and he clutched at it and used it to pull himself to the surface before all went grey with the loss of oxygen. The other scrambled upwards as quickly as possible, and Bluejay used his strong arm to heft Bood, whose arm had been broken by the steering wheel of the boat as it heeled over. Most of the crew had retained their night vision goggles and were able to see where they were going, but Bluejay had not, and tripped and slid along while his burden hissed and groaned in agony. Tibby, who had made it to the bank on his own, brought up the rear of the party and kept glancing over his shoulder, fearing the dragon gator would crawl up towards them. However, it drifted with the current and contented itself with glaring after its tormentors. When he saw that it would not follow, he stopped and looked back in a focused manner. A large figure sprang from the water near the end of the monster's tail and spewed out the black gunk in a mighty retch. It collapsed around the tail and appeared to catch it, pause for a moment, and then climb up towards the body. Bjorn hadn't felt the impact of the swishing tail, but it had landed fortuitously on his abdomen and helped him to cough and vomit the wretched mess that had invaded his body. He started to collapse and grasped at anything he could find to escape the water for long enough to catch a breath. He soon found himself on a sharp and ragged set of large scales. He could not stop himself from coughing and caught only a little air with each involuntary inhale. He retched again and managed a small lungful. He coughed some more and then breathed in a little more. He coughed harder and his vision faded and greyed, yet he was able to take in an almost full double lungful. He felt the mass of his ride shift and slide deeper into the water. He released his hold and turned onto his back. He coughed for a good 10 minutes before anything like normal breathing returned. The entire time he stood chest deep in water, the current slowly shifting him downstream, and he waited for what he feared would be a crushing chomp from the strongest bite on the planet, at least in the past 65 million years. He continued to cough at intervals as he sidestepped along the muddy bottom, always pushing towards the north bank, which rose ever more steeply. Black Cat Ridge, he thought. Eventually, the angle of the bank lessened, and he passed under some trees that overhang the bank, all the while looking nervously for snakes in the low-hanging branches. He heard an odd chittering laugh and eventually located green glowing eyes and a wicked face with a dark band across the eyes. That freaky raccoon thing! He looked about, expecting the disaster that the thing seemed to presage. Where the rest of the team halted, as Tibby's cries to "Stop!" finally overrode their panicked flight uphill. He called for them to help him as he swam out to catch a line on the boat. They soon formed a human chain and had the craft stopped along the bank, though capsized. They managed to pull it in partially ashore, with Bluejay digging in his special foot and employing his special arm. The team soon had the craft righted as McCall and company arrived to assist. Bood had calmed and now lay on his side, cradling his injured appendage. Most of the equipment was in the boat and was either in stowed boxes or tied to some of the permanent structure. Tibby took out the first aid kit and approached his old friend. "Get the boat cleaned up while I take care of Bood. Then we go look for your big friend." His already noticeable accent had grown thicker with stress, but the others understood. The best chance they had of retrieving Bjorn, if he was still alive, was to track him in the boat. The bite from their intended prey had removed a sizable chunk and had split the whole material, but it seemed that the faithful vessel was still able to float. When the trees swept back from the bank and Bjorn spotted a clear area, the parking lot for the dredgers, he thought sluggishly. struggling to breathe and to fight the slow but heavy current was taxing even his deep reserves of vitality. And there were some rocks and used railroad ties stacked purposely along the bank, and he had swam a few strokes until he could gain purchase and climb from the brown water. As his right boot cleared the water, something clamped down ferociously on the toe of his left boot. "Dragon gator!" was his first forlorn thought, but it stayed locked in place and did not twist and tear at his body. It was very heavy, but nowhere near the ton weight he'd estimated for the big creature that had turned him from hunter to prey. He managed to turn over and place his backside between a pair of rocks. He took out his big blade and then flexed and pulled his left foot inward. A bulbous head with a parrot-like beak and beady eyes soon emerged. A large, lumpy shell protruded above and behind it. An alligator snapping turtle. It must have come from the creek mouth or ditch, with the overhanging trees just before the parking lot, he thought angrily. He first tried to kick the creature so it would release his foot, while it stubbornly clung to the heavy boot toe. The pain for him was intense, and his vision and conscious thoughts began to fade. The last thing he heard was more chittering laughter from the trees. When he next regained the ability to think clearly and without effort, he noted that the head of the snapper was still locked onto his foot. He used the seax to unlock the beaked reptilian jaws and then sat back in relief. It still hurt terribly, but the pressure was released. The entire time he continued to cough and spit up gunk. He was miserable, but alive. "Maybe breathing is a part of my transition for an episode," he considered. "I was suddenly triggered." And just having so much trouble, the rest of the team found him huddled there at the edge of the parking lot a short time later, coughing weakly and trying mightily to breathe freely. "Turtles ain't river animals. They like still water," Tibby informed the rest of the team. Bood and Bjorn had required a trip to the local hospital, and Bjorn still coughed alarmingly and deeply. His bandaged foot rested on a cooler. Bood simply cradled his casted appendage in its sling. TJ cleared his throat in empathy with his large friend. "Why you two getting patched?" The rest of us took a closer look. "There's a wide ditch that runs from the drainage pond down to the river. It's just the other side of the brush from the parking lot. We found some tracks and we think the male saber-toothed hog used it as a wallow, at least the shallows. A good chance Franklin the turtle came from that pond. I'm not sure why though. Maybe the workers have been feeding him. He might associate people with food. Never know with wild animals." Bood spoke, a little slowed from his physical trauma, a little slurred from the pain medication. "Gators, they like their meat a little raunchy. You said the high sheriff killed a bunch of hogs a few days ago?" He looked around the circle at the original team. Blue Jay nodded. "Yes, there are a good 20 carcasses near the crest of the ridge." Bood looked at Tibby, and the two men shared a grin. "What?" Blue Jay asked. It was stinky and grubby work, but the team shifted the carcasses of the feral hogs down to the drainage pond. Scavengers had been at them, and even though it was autumn, it was still hot, and so they had decayed enough to be rank. Anything that would want to eat such things would be drawn to the area, and Bjorn and Bood held down the camp and kept an eye on Bran and Skylan and operated the drones. They had moved the new RV to the site where maidens had once stood in honor of Jim and the two interpret fathers who had given their lives to stop the Porcine horror. Bjorn's cough had gotten a little better, and the hospital had issued him some serious antibiotics and breathing apparatus, yet he still felt unusually weak. He knew that the best he could do for the team was to stand back and let the able-bodied take care of business. Bood was equally anxious to be of assistance. He was able to pace and did so often. The two men were not accustomed to resting while others laboured, and it touched on their pride and their sense of duty. Eventually, Bood paced himself to fatigue and sat beside his new, mega-sized body. "I can't steer the boat or work the lasso, but I got eyes and I could spot that dragon gator before anybody else could," Bood mused. "I could stand, though I can't walk well,"
Stupid turtle broke 3 of my toes, and the pressure cut maybe did some pretty serious damage to the tendons and ligaments. I can put a rope on a pole if we can get the beast hooked again," Bjorn rumbled, a bit dejectedly. He scratched Brown behind the ear. "Of course we do have to wash the pups, and so McCall can help move the dead pigs." He grinned, the first since he'd been tossed from the boat. "I really don't mind that we aren't having to grapple with rotting pig carcasses." Tibby's look brightened, and he joined his friend in a gratuitous smile. "I like the smell of that pork. We done pissed off the big bastard, so maybe it'll come close to get to the boat again," Tibby assured the remainder of the team. Blue Jay looked towards McCall and TJ. "This time, if things go sideways, the two of you will take out the Dragon Gator. Technical solutions will just have to be happy with studying a carcass." McCall and his partner agreed and hefted their firearms. "You know where to aim." They each described the target areas, and Tibby showed them another diagram of where to kill-shoot the big animal. "Big head, big target, can't miss, no?" Cassie stifled a yawn. It was still before midnight, but they'd been working some odd and shifting hours. And when she was once again able to focus her eyes, she saw it there, ahead. It appeared to be sniffing at the ditch entrance to the pond, while at the same time eyeing the watercraft full of humans downstream. "Got it, 2 o'clock, she calmly informed the crew. Blue Jay, at the pond with Will, activated his communicator. "Bjorn, you got eyes?" "Aye, aye," came the basso response over the communicator. The beast stirred and moved towards the shoreline. It clearly wanted to gain purchase on the bottom to employ its superior bulk and strength in case the boat attacked again. Tibby quietly called out, "Gonna send the boat closer. Be ready." The crew barely had time to acknowledge before the engine smoothly engaged and set the craft towards the menacing eyes set below armoured ridges. The Dragon Gator bucked slightly and raised its head. It swiftly moved into deeper parts of the channel and under the boat. They passed over it completely, catching only a lashing thump from the tail. By the time they were able to turn the craft, the monster had already completed a 180-degree turn and entered a wide ditch and was crawling towards the pond, away from potential harm and towards a delectable odour. "It's headed your way in a hurry, Blue Jay," Bjorn informed the team leader. He watched the drone images and could catch glimpses of the crenellated black armour as the beast worked its way towards the pond and the enticing smell of rotting pork. "Got it. We have eyes. Be ready, Will," Blue Jay responded. The enormous reptile crawled over the trap that Bood and Tibby had developed. Instead of working out a triggering device, they set the two team members to the task of activating the mechanism. "Pull!" Blue Jay shouted, despite the open line communicator. It was an exciting moment. The trap was a simple box trap, upscaled for their target animal. A spring-loaded barrier raised the head of the creature to get it to stop or at least pause. The walls raised and locked upright, while a pair of large logs rolled in against the wall panels to create extra weight. The Dragon Gator burst through the front barrier. The side walls clenched most of its body, and the logs ensured that it could no longer effectively move its limbs. Yet the head and neck were beyond the front of the box, and the gaping maw, full of peg-like teeth, swung from side to side, seeking a target to chomp, while the beast let forth a hissing roar. TJ and McCall approached on foot along the east bank of the creek ditch and took position to fire should the need arise. And Tibby and Cassie followed closely behind them and carried a heavily weighted blanket. Tibby took hold of one edge and, like a casting net, threw it over the eyes of the monster to blind it. And shortly, the thrashing of the head and the hissing roar slowed and lowered in volume. The creature was confused. It had not been helpless in so long that it did not know how to react. Tibby slipped a lasso around the snout and tightened it. The Dragon Gator tried to roll, but the tarp confined it. He stepped in and wrapped the rope around the ferocious jaws a few times, and then tied it off. Blue Jay came forward with a special tape and thoroughly wrapped the snout and the rope. Tibby grinned around at the rest of the team.
We done got us a big old dragon gator. Gotta be some money in this somehow. Dawn hinted to the east, the angry red competing with a lazy yellow, out over the city. Clouds had gathered overnight. It was definitely going to rain today. The darkening thunderheads had the deep, bruised look of heavy precipitation. Transport team will have fun getting him loaded, but at least they can use the parking lot. The regular work crew won't shop with that coming, Cassie noted. Will, ever the optimist? A little cool rain may keep the big fellow calm. And Bood spoke up. You're right. Them old fellas sometimes likes to take a cool shower instead of a sunbath. Tibby nodded along with his partner. McCall, with each hound sided up next to him, smiled. The lads like the rain, snow, anything that falls from the heavens. I, however, do not favour having the smell like they will after getting caught out in the rain. They smell great after a bath, but when they get wet on their own, phew. He waved his hand in front of his nose, in memory of the stenches past. Bran and Skylan grinned up at him and whacked their bodies in reply. They were in a good mood and found the fine mist that preceded the storm to be comfortable. And Bjorn rumbled. So, what's the plan? And Bluejay grinned at him. I'm glad you asked, Bjorn. We need to get you medical treatment, ASAP. Your foot needs more attention and, even with the breathing treatments and antibiotics, you look terrible. And a debriefing took place at the nearest DMTS Inc. facility. The team, minus the contractors, were gathered around Bjorn's hospital bed. He was propped and looked more like himself. Thought we lost you for a little while, Bearman, Bluejay said seriously. You were barely breathing and rasping at that. Who knew that breathing mud might lead to pneumonia? Bjorn smiled ruefully. What sensation for me to feel so helpless. Weird. He held up a hand. I know. Weird is what we do. Not used to being weak, but not being able to breathe apparently does that. Not sure what the Tactical Solutions medical team did to my lungs, but it seems to have cleared them thoroughly. And Cassie leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Welcome to the human race, big fella. Will and TJ settled for pats on his shoulder, and McCall with a handshake. Bran and Skylan slobbered and licked their delight on his face at his recovery. And then another pair of figures entered the room. Silvio looked mostly healed, and Brain flown in for the debriefing. Silvio mock scowled at Bluejay. I see that you let my former trainee get hurt. He then mock glowered at Bjorn. Maybe you needed more field training. A turtle taking out a bear. Ridiculous. And as he saw the last of his comrades file out of the room to let him rest and recuperate, Bjorn shifted to allow his still sore foot to rest in a better position. A large shadow stepped out of the restroom. No way he'll get comfortable, sounded a rumble reminiscent of his own basso voice, and Brain grinned at him. I suppose you have at least one more question, and I have been authorized to answer. Let's just say more. Bjorn blinked. His mentor was even larger than he, and was the one who had taught him to move silently when needed. And so he wasn't surprised that despite his height and bulk, Brain had managed to remain behind without the others noticing. Perhaps they had, but they know better than to come back and question him. Yes, we spoke about the Unaki. I still prefer to call them Etins. More earthly term, but they didn't come into this mission unless they have something to do with the mutations. And Brain shook his head. Not directly. The genetics program was inspired by their work, but of our own devising. We've been at it since the beginning. Nothing else puzzled you during the mission? He sounded almost disappointed. Bjorn smiled. Of course. The crazy coon of Crazy Coon Hill. It was not a raccoon, unless it was mutated. Yet, it seemed like something else altogether. He arched an eyebrow in curiosity. Brain issued a small sigh of relief. I was beginning to think that the lack of O2 had given you brain damage. He paused to grin. You are right, except it is. They rather than it. A small colony we discovered while cleaning up after the Harvey mess. We still haven't figured out their language, and the two we captured for the lab turned vicious and then fought to the death to escape. We believe that they are an extraterrestrial species, though far too primitive to even contemplate interplanetary travel. Either dropped off by Star Trekking species or refugees from some portal. We just don't know yet. So far, we have them contained to an area, and we believe that they are, or may have been, around for a while though. Crazy Coon Hill is not a recent name. That's pretty much it. Oh, and they seem to really enjoy watching bloodshed when not directly causing it. Bjorn shook his head. This just keeps getting curiouser and curiouser. But hey, it's what we do. Now, before the team was disbanded post-mission, Blue Jay hosted a small celebration of their success. He smiled around at the people who had made his first team leader role a success. When I was a kid, there was a commercial on the local TV station in Houston for a company that fixed brakes. They had a jingle that had been on the air for decades. Mean like an alligator, strong like a bear. Brake, check brakes, stop, anywhere. And so we had a mean alligator and a strong bear. He looked meaningfully at Bjorn. We checked that gator and put the brakes on before he ate anybody. That we know of. Head shakes and eye rolls greeted him. What next? Asked TJ. I'm ready for more. And Cassie added, Mom wanted to name me Cassandra, but Dad convinced her that everybody would end up calling me Cassie anyway. So, still, like it's the classical, Cassandra. People often fail to take what I say seriously, until it's too late. And she eyed Will and her big brother in a mockingly stern manner. I think we are needed at DMT Solutions. I'm not sure what other company does, but it seems there must be a bigger purpose than just chasing strange critters and handling weird situations. They make money somehow. She glanced around at the regular employees for answers, but they all remained silent. Another company tradition and its strictest rule on sensitive information. She rolled her eyes. I know, above our pay grade. The rest laughed, but Will remained silent and thoughtful. What next? Brain rumbled. Is that if the three of you decide to sign contracts, you will go into formal training. We did things a little backwards, since you had some field experience first. Yet nothing prepared you like DMTS Incorporated basic skills for Field Associate School. Besides, you've already seen the field side. You may want to explore the tech side as well, or management, or training, or out front public operations. He caught Will's eye. The possibilities do not preclude caring for your family. And Will considered for a moment and rewarded the big man with his magnificent lopsided grin. I'm in. There's enough time off for me to visit my siblings and Mum. Besides, you keep giving us better toys for each mission. I can't wait to see what you allow us to use next. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Absolutely wonderful. Chest-pounding stuff. Guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. Of course, if you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with myself at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforesterfear@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Above all, guys, we're back in gear. Looking forward to dumping lots of content over the next few days. I hope you're all well and happy, your friends and family alike. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.